Well, I am Solveig Wikström from Stockholm University School of Business, and I am very happy to share this roundtable, which is not that round, actually. I think that we can all agree with Ned about the importance of the grassroots for a flourishing economy. As a business economist, I have often seen how difficult it is for firms to use the knowledge of the grassroots. In this case, it is from the end users and the consumers, and also from the shop floor and factory floor people. But it's not about, I think the grassroots are not, flourishing grassroots, the grassroots are not enough for a flourishing economy. There has to be much more coming. And we now have the chance to listen to 5 high-flying European economist professors about their view on what has come out from this conference so far and how they perceive the discussions. Well, I suggest that we take the initial presentations just for within 10 minutes, so we have plenty of time for the discussions within the panel and also with the audience. And I will call upon you in alphabetic order. And let's see, the first out is Jean-Paul Fitoussi. He is professor of economics at the Sciences Po and Lys University. And your contribution includes analysis of inflation, unemployment, and the role of macroeconomic policy. Let's see what you have to say.
Ned, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for opening a new avenue of research, a new subject. And I have followed with a lot of interest what has been said today. And although I disagree with everybody, as usual, I also agree with everybody in some of what is said. In fact, we are speaking of a decline of the American empire, or to make it short, the decline of the West. And that led me to question myself about our capacity of looking long term, because we have traversed a lot of period where we thought that it was the end. For example, the golden 30s. Everybody thought that the golden 30s would last forever. Then there was the oil shock, the great inflation, and so on and so forth, and the golden 30s stopped. And then came the 80s, where we realized that there was a slowdown of productivity growth. Already then, in the mid-70s, there has been a slowdown of productivity growth. So the idea is now made structural. And the debate at that time in Europe vis-à-vis the US was how to do like the US. That means how to have a lower path of productivity growth. Because a lower path of productivity growth allows to increase the content of the employment content of growth, to resolve the unemployment problem of Europe. And then we had the Eurosclerosis we thought that we will live forever with the Eurosclerosis, which was mainly a disease of Germany. But the disease did not last forever, as everybody knows. And then we had the Great Moderation. You remember? It was 5 years ago. We were thinking that growth will proceed forever, but it was the end of economic history, because we knew how to deal with fluctuation, and we knew even how to avoid fluctuation. And then came the crisis. After the crisis now, we think that we are entering a long period of decline of productivity. Okay, thank you. At least a period where we have lost the secret of productivity growth. And, and so I would not bet on which type of period we are. The assumption of a long-term decrease for cultural reason of productivity growth is much interesting. But I need much more to be convinced about that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. To say things as I feel it. The reason that you exposed, Ned, are very convincing. But when I think, I am a bit uncomfortable. For example, it implies that you, instead of having a life of quality, you have a good life. Okay? All this concept relates to the capability approach by Amartya Sen, which, in a nutshell, is saying that our aim for the people is that each may choose the life he desires to live. So is that a good life? Or it is just the life full of modern values, individualism, vitalism, self-expression? And here too I have some problem. First, that the good life, if I understood, began in the 19th century and somewhere 10 years after the Second World War. Is that true? And then, when I look at the history, when I read the novels which have been written during this period, it did not appear to the people that they were having a good life. It was a poor quality life. We had a lot of wars during this period. And so I am hesitating, or I'm confusing concept, to characterize this period as dynamic period. It was dynamic for wars. We have 2 world wars. And then, if I understood too, what you are saying is that social protection is making us departing from the good life, from the dynamism, from mass flourishing, and so on and so forth. And I want to understand also the difference between the good life and well-being, because one of the essential determinants of well-being is economic security. Why it is an essential determinant of well-being? Because for at least two reasons. It allows persons to project themselves toward the future and not to live day to day as if it were their last day. And second, it gives to the person much more autonomy. And I thought that autonomy was an essential component for a person to his capacity to innovate. If otherwise, lack of autonomy means that too much is at stake for a person to take the risk of innovation. And in a society where there is a generalized lack of autonomy, then the society is structured top-down. I don't think that we could find a lot of grassroots innovation in such a society where there is no autonomy for a person. So where there is basically no security and where their rate of dependence of a firm in which they work is too high, and where the organization is too violent. So, I have finished. Well, you never have a time. I want also to say that we have a problem of metric. You took as one of your indicator of the evolution of productivity the multi-factor productivity. But we know that this is very ill measured. It is very ill measured. For example, if we look at the government sector, I know that it is not fashionable to speak about the government sector. If we look at the government sector, we know that the way the production of the government sector is measured implies that in the government sector the rate of growth productivity is basically zero. And to end, just a word, democracy. We have seen that there were two competing explanations. One was institutional pessimism, and the other technological pessimism. Institutional pessimism, for me, whatever the way you think at it, means basically mistrust or distrust for democracy. Thank you very much.
Foray, and he is chair of economics and innovation at the École Polytechnique Fédérale at Lausanne. And his main fields are the economics of production, knowledge, distribution, and the tension between the diversity and standardization of production and consumption. That's very interesting because that's part of the late modern values. So the floor is yours. No, you sit here, so I sit. Contact.
So good afternoon, thank you. I will be very short. Also, I have to apologize because I will have to leave the roundtable a little bit before the end. I have to catch a train. And you know, as a Swiss resident, I am used to use the Swiss railway station, which is very easy. And one told me that maybe Penn Station is more difficult, so to get in. So I'm sorry for that. So I'm very pleased to, in a sense, to see the agenda of Ned Phelps and co-authors and friends, etc., focusing on culture, values to explain dynamism and innovation. You know, I make in economics of innovation for many years, and I've been interested these last years in explaining Swiss performance. You know, Swiss performance on innovation is absolutely amazing. This is first place in any ranking about competitiveness, innovation scoreboard, etc., in spite of the fact that Switzerland has no innovation policy. It's a unique country with no innovation policy at all. You know, this collection of instruments about R&D subsidies, R&D tax credit, large-scale technological program, etc. All these things don't exist in Switzerland, and in spite of that, Swiss is really first in innovation. As an anecdote, you know, there was a question at the European Parliament by a Dutch deputy to the Commission, and he said, you know, he asked why Switzerland is so excellent in innovation, while and this excellence is achieved without innovation policy, while you are recommending the Commission to implement all these instruments to correct market failures, etc. And so the response of the Commission was correct. We will try to persuade Switzerland to have an innovation policy, so that Switzerland will join, you know, the intellectually comfortable category of good countries because of a policy. Anyway, so when I am asked to explain Switzerland performance, of course, it is tempting to look at all indicators: R&D intensity, patent intensity, university, industry relationships, etc. But most of these indicators don't explain anything. They have to be explained also, you know. And of course, also we have good framework conditions like financial developments, flexibility of labor markets, as well as first-class institutions in terms of education, science, etc. But at some points we have to touch culture and value, it seems to me. And when I made a couple of case studies about strong innovation and entrepreneurial discoveries in Switzerland, I really think that two cultural factors are very important. The first one is anti-elitist tradition within Swiss society, and that allow people to join forces. Innovation requires connection, requires, you know, being together to solve collectively innovative problem. And so historically in Switzerland, we see that the most brilliant scientists, they like to get their hands dirty, actually, to work with practitioners, with industry people. For a long time ago, while Joe, in your book, you know, you say that you always had a gap between, you know, the scientists, les savants, and the industry, etc. In Switzerland, it's not the case. And for example, Theodor Kocher, who was Nobel Prize in medicine early 20th century, he transformed the Bern hospital into a tools factory, you know, to really invent and apply tools, etc. that a Vienna doctor or a Paris doctor would never have done. So you have this anti-elitist tradition which allow people to join forces, and so then you have innovation as a general project of the society, not just the agenda of a few elite. And I think it's really key. And the second important cultural feature, this is the anti-bureaucratic tradition, which means that the Swiss entrepreneurs, they are not used to wait from the government anything. And so they, in the same time, they are launching new activities, new innovation, etc. They are producing the private institutions which will allow to solve the problems which need to be solved for sustaining the growth of a new activity. And there are many examples of that where you have these private institutions to support new kind of training, education, R&D, etc., that in other countries would have been produced by the state, by the government. And so the main question, I think, is, yeah, we have this culture of anti-elitist, and anti-bureaucratic traditions, which allow for a lot of actions to create the private institutions which are needed for innovation. And the main question, I think, for Switzerland today is, at a time of globalization, in a sense, at a time where, you know, most top-level managers of Swiss companies are not anymore Swiss, how these values, which are quite Swiss, will be continued and maintained. And I think it is a much more important question than just looking at, you know, R&D intensity, patent intensity, etc., etc. My second point, and I'm finished with that, is caused by, you know, the clash between two articles in my favorite journal, which is Le Monde. You know, this is the Journal of Paris. And so the first article was this interview of Edmund Phelps on August 29. You know, maybe you have not read it, but it was a full page, and I was very happy because, in a sense, I was thinking, okay, now you have this interview in Le Monde. You know, l'histoire de l'innovation s'est arrêtée à la fin des années 1960. So then the French will learn something about, you know, what is innovation, etc. Too bad, because last week, you know, we had another article, and this is the announcement of the new Grand Plan Industriel of the French presidency, which is, you know, a new generation of top-down centralized programs from, you know, the next high-speed train generation to new aircrafts, etc., etc. So, bienvenue, Monsieur Colbert. Monsieur Colbert is back. And so, too bad that I don't think you had a big impact, because it seems to me that what you said in your interview is not really what has been applied by the French government last week. But this story is interesting because this shows that France and some other countries, I think, still think that you can generate dynamism and prosperity with a great deal of science and technology, but without innovation. And then there is a confusion, in a sense, between technological accomplishment that any society made, from, you know, the pyramids to the cathedrals, from Sputnik to man to the moon, confusion between that and innovation. And this is very different. Great technological achievement there requires some kind of institutions which are quite simple, you know, bureaucracy, a lot of public funding, and the state is both the funder and the client, etc., etc. Innovation requires much more sophisticated institutions. And politicians are very often confusing that. Even, you know, in this country, in the US, and for example, I read the President Obama a State of Union address of 2011. And so, you know, he established innovation as the absolute priority. But in the same speech, all examples and, you know, slogan, etc., was about Apollo. You know, we will found the Apollo of our time, etc. And so this is a confusion between what is innovation, this is really the objective of this conference, and technological accomplishment, which is a different thing. And one of the challenges of today is to create some symbiotic relations between this kind of great technological accomplishments that we know how to do, you know, from NASA to etc., all this big administration, and innovation from grassroots, etc. And I think it's a very important issue, a very a great challenge, because in any case, you know, the bet of countries like France, which is that the science and technology agenda of a few elite will deliver, you know, enough innovation to sustain the economic growth of the country, is getting to be wrong. Thank you.
Professor Foray. Maybe the Swiss model is something to copy for us. Okay.
Maybe.
Maybe. The next out is Assar Lindbeck. He is professor of at the Institute of International Economic Studies at Stockholm University. And his work is mainly about macroeconomics, unemployment, and welfare state. And I think he's most of all known for his 24 years in the committee of the Nobel Prize. Well,
that would be terrible.
So let me see. The floor is yours, or the chair is yours now.
Well, just a few reflections. First, I agree with Fitoussi here that I have difficulties to regard the period before the Second World War as a particularly good life. It was not only two world wars, it was a deep depression in the 30s, and it was mass poverty still in most countries. If we should point out some period as good life, I think it has been in the post-war, post-Second World War period, when mass poverty was finally abolished. I think we all agree that a good innovation system should rely on an interaction between small and large firms, that they have different comparative advantages. Small firms often are very innovative, large firms make product improvements of different kinds. But there is also important to emphasize that the relation is rather symbiotic, in the sense that many small firms are selling their innovations to large firms or are bought up by large firms, and many small firms, people making contributions there, have often been working in large firms. So you need what Baumol calls symbiosis between David and Goliath. What about the character of academic research? Well, Ned emphasized in his book that in the 19th century it was really done by people far away from the research frontier. And Nelson pointed out that that has changed, and that is clearly true, that the importance of basic research is much more important for innovation now than in the future. And I would predict that that will continue. I noticed, for instance, now that 80% of all innovations in Sweden during the last 10 years have been done in areas close to universities. And you have, of course, the MIT, Stanford connections in the United States. So I think we have to recognize this. That does not mean that we need only large firms for innovation, as Schumpeter thought, but rather this interaction and mixture of small and large firms. What are then some obstacles which have not been mentioned here? I think one is the short-sightedness of firms and people operating on capital markets. I guess the background of this is that the capital markets today are dominated by pension funds and similar funds who do not exert voice. They are just exerting exit. And that means that they don't take any responsibility for the actions and the development of the firms where they have shares. So I think we really have to think hard about the possibility of getting stronger voice activities and a longer time perspective. Maybe we should not have quarterly reports. Maybe we should have one-year reports by firms. So we get the kind of one-year capitalism instead of quarter capitalism as we have at the present time. One serious problem mentioned by Nelson is that there has been difficult to make innovations in personal services like preschool, training, education, health and old age care. But that is not written in stone. If there are possibilities even there, I think the new information technology opens possibilities of stimulating productivity growth in those settings and reorganizations. In Sweden, we have really introduced a voucher system not only for preschools, schools, but visits to doctors, but also old age care. And that is a difficult system we have created, but there is some hope that that will favor innovations in the system instead of having a completely monopolized system. But that's still open question if that competition works in this sector where you have so much asymmetric information. Then I think one of the dangers has been mentioned here, that is the tendencies of governments to provide selective incentives rather than try to get a good general environment. That's mentioned by several people here. I think it's terribly important because rent seeking is an obvious consequence of selective subsidies. I would finish then by a reflection about corporativism. That is, Ned regard corporativism as an obstacle for innovation and dynamism. I think we have been much more nuanced there. There are completely different types of corporativism. We cannot at the same time talk about totalitarian corporativism in Italy, during Mussolini and Franco, as completely different animals than the corporativism in Finland, where, for instance, the employer and employees organizations agree about the general level of rate of wage increase. It doesn't become 10% when there's room for 3%. Or the German system where the Chamber of Commerce is in charge of retraining in the system and the apprenticeship system. I think that is very positive contributions of corporativism. I think the worst type of corporativism, that is a corporativism that exists in the country that is supposed not to have it, the United States. For reasons given earlier, it takes the form of lobbying, bribes, and that is really the worst form of corporativism, because it doesn't simplify production, but it just results in rent seeking. Thanks.
Thank you, Assar. So next on the area is Stefano Micossi, and you are professor at economics and director general at Assonime. Oh, that's very difficult, yeah. And he has written extensively about the European political and financial crisis.
I'm a bit out of my depth in this discussion, but the pleasure of being here to celebrate Ned Phelps' 80th birthday and the fact that I anyway read his book has given me the confidence to take the plunge into this cold water and try to say what I have understood of this very rich debate today. It seems to me that, where do we land? We seem to have one main common ground and 3 competing explanations. The common ground is Ned Phelps' definition of the modern economy as an economy driven by innovation. Innovation, as he reminds us in his book, is mass flourishing. Organizational change is much more than technology, albeit technology may provide the main component in those organizational changes. Innovation requires a willingness by society to accept that some people may gain large returns from innovation, and that some innovation may entail large dislocation in employment and ways of life. And various societal institutions and cultural factors play a central role in facilitating and encouraging this acceptance. This is the broad consensus. The 3 competing explanations. Well, they are Gordon's headwinds, the corporatist degeneration of the modern economy, and the decreasing ability and willingness of our societies to accept and manage change and innovation. Gordon's headwinds. The way I read Gordon's analysis of productivity is that technology has enabled huge savings of human effort and massively decreased transaction costs, bringing masses of people to the market economy, opening the way to mass markets and to huge economies of scale and scope, which is the real Chandler explanation of the large corporation impact on the growth of productivity. But also improvements in marketing and distribution as important as improvements in production technology, and services as important as manufacturing, organizational changes. A key role here clearly was played by the increase in the supply of labor, quantity and quality, which increased its adaptability to the new technological opportunities. Thus, these headwinds do not seem to entail that technology will no longer bring to us fresh opportunities, but that there will be less untapped opportunity to use technology to improve the way we work and consume and contribute to our society's organic growth, which is Ned's expression in his book. Gordon and Phelps both stress in this context the adverse role of increasing inequality. To this factor, I will come back in the context of my 3rd competing explanation. To Gordon headwinds, I would also add an additional factor, which is the apparent degeneration, enormous distortion of incentives stemming from the apparent degeneration in the goals and incentives of the large corporation. short-termism, and the money culture, as is discussed in Ned's book. So this corporation, in their quest for fast and large gains, are diverting enormous resources away from investment for innovation within our societies. The second explanation is spreading corporatism. In Ned's words, the emergence of a corporatist complex between the government and the private sector, whose pervasiveness is suggested by the inexorable accumulation of regulation to foster companies' advantage, and the equally inexorable accumulation of individual entitlements. Reference here should be made to Mancur-Olson's theory of public choices, stressing the role of redistributed organized interest groups in stifling productivity growth. Please note that in Olson's analysis, the growing weight of redistributive interest groups is somehow inevitable over time. It is, in a sense, the societal equivalent of what is aging for individuals. Two observations are in order here. The first concerns one causality change of special importance, running from real wage losses and rising unemployment among the less skilled to mounting demand for protection and income support. The specific responses that governments have put together to this problem may have been ill-thought, Ned books well explained, but the rising demands for protection could not be held back once equal opportunity for all started to wane. Here we can see the corrosive impact of rising inequality on dynamism. Let me recall here that Harvard economic historian David Landes, who passed away, as you may know, in August, argued in his 1998 book on the wealth and poverty of nations that what set North America apart from South America in the early Industrial Revolution was relative wage equality, due to the fact that workers in North America had to be enticed to work with rewarding wages, because otherwise they always had the alternative option of going west and finding their own land and their own self-employment. According to Landes, this explains why the North American economy did not experience the sort of fractured society and the cleavage between capital and labor that has been a constant feature of Latin American economic growth. And the second comment on corporatism is that America seems to remain well ahead in creativity and the entire for instance, in the entire IT industry, hardware and software. It has well struck back remarkably in the high-stakes mobile telephony, which is an area where it had been lacking behind, as an early European lead was established by regulation and standard setting. But now American companies are again leading and in fact shaping the game, and it's not only AT&T and Verizon, but also Apple and Google, which are playing as great game changers. The success of the American system is an obvious tribute to the Silicon Valley ecosystem. However, somehow this is not translating into, yet at least, permanently higher productivity growth. Which brings us back to the question of declining productivity growth. Is it waning creativity as in Phelps, or is in Gordon's headwinds taking the steam off the impact of innovation on productivity growth? And my third competing explanation, maybe they're all complementary anyway, I will call it, following Moses Abramovich's social capability, or Amartya Sen, but it's a slightly different meaning. Here, we are really talking broadly about culture, societal support for the modern economy, and the social capability to manage the uncertainties and dislocation that may be involved with the modern society. A key component of social capability is human capital and the state of education, as embodied in a nation's population and its existing institutional arrangements, which constrains society's ability to manage technology and innovation. Two developments may have produced permanent damage here to our social capability over the past few decades, 3 to 4 decades. First, not only the US seems to have reached a plateau of educational attainment, Gordon's second headwind, but more important may be the fact that skills of large parts of the labor force have been made obsolete by globalization. As a result, large shares of our working population has been pushed to the margins of society. For them, there is little reward or hope of improvement from work. An uncertainty about their occupational and income prospects has exploded, which has moved them increasingly among the supporters of what Ned calls the traditional society. And second, there is a broader legitimacy problem generated in a context of rising inequality by spreading mistrust in the globalized corporation, especially, but not solely, the financial corporation. These corporations, the global corporation, have exploited their acquired freedom from the rules and controls of national jurisdictions to undertake systematic and extensive violations of long-established principles of fair, I would even venture to say ethical, behavior. Globalization has made it possible for global cooperation to break loose from national jurisdictions and national rules, gaining large rewards from activities that do not entail productivity improvement, certainly not for our societies. Tax evasion, works as exploitation in Asian sweatshops, consumer exploitation in new mass markets, big pharma in China, big oil in a number of developing countries, ripping off savers worldwide. It does not come as a surprise that this has weakened acceptability of the modern economy, as the original social contract between labor and capital appears badly damaged. Thank you for your attention.
The last commentator is now Luigi Paganetto. And he is professor of European economics and president of Economics Foundation at the University of Rome. And he has been writing extensively about the crisis of the political governments and the slow economic growth in Europe. More of disasters.
I confess that reading Ned books has been an adventure of ideas, because the book is so rich of ideas and so rich of cultural, reference, that it's even difficult to put together a lot of suggestion and perspective it presents. But let me go to the essential. I'm very glad to be here and to talk about dynamism. Dynamism is a very important concept, and Ned put in evidence that there is a difference, a very important difference between growth and dynamism. And this is a very crucial question. And so the demand, or the problem that comes immediately after is where dynamism comes from. The net answer is that comes from the change in values and attitudes that led people in the modern economy. Individualism, vitalism, entrepreneurship, willingness to start with a new project are the character of such modern economy. Individuals confronting with the novelty of and the challenging world is a point that has been put in evidence by Ned. But is productivity slow down a backlash against the modern ethos that started in the 19th century? This is a central question. My answer is that the decline of dynamism and innovation in advanced economy could be a temporary phenomenon. Because, let me say that looking at the vision of a dynamism coming from the behavior of people in the modern economy, we have to take into account also the changes that are occurring at the national and international level in the last 20 years. The today crisis created new conditions of life that tended to represent an exogenous factor that change the economic behavior. It's my personal view that a crisis can be viewed as something that is linked to three main events: the increase in income inequality, the demographic trends, and the wealth shifting from advanced to emerging countries. Are these phenomena so important to change the way by which people adopt one kind of behavior or another? Could be that the economic crisis will push innovation and change toward dynamism as a reaction to the events that they mentioned, or not. I think that in some extent there is a competition between the countries. How to respond to the extraordinary geopolitical, technological, and demographic trend in the last quarter century. The competition is coming as a way by which countries try to stimulate innovation as a tool for regaining prosperity linked to the modern value. The new dynamism will be probably connected to the adoption of new technologies. I am, in some extent, one optimist about technology, looking at the distinction made by Luigi Zingales. Bob Gordon supported the view that the United States have to take into account the innovation slowdown connected with the end of big technological breakthrough. Moreover, United States have to face strong headwinds to demography, education, inequality, globalization, energy, environment, consumer, and government debt, as Bob said this morning. My point is, what about the next technological cycle that is announced in a lot of studies? What is it about the expected change in the energy sector, named for energy efficiency, industry, energy efficiency in industry, transport, and buildings? The demand side of energy market is expected to be a driving force for innovation and dynamism of the economies that will be able to take the new opportunities. This is my point. The carbon capture and storage technology are expected to be dominating innovation on the following years. Let me make one point about Bob Gordon breakthrough. If you look at some important book in the history of Western industrialization, like the Paul Davies book, he points out how much time ran from the moment in which there is emergence of new technologies and this application. The case of electricity is a classical one. The consequence is that I think that the further applications of internet and green technologies will have a trickle-down effect whereby the creation of one high-paying, high-tech job will have a job multiplier effect several times that number. The case of Apple in Cupertino with 2,000 employees working and job-related of 60,000 is important. The idea surrounding this argument is that despite today's slowdown in productivity and new technological cycle, a new technological cycle pushed a new flow of innovation and increase employment. I want to avoid to deny the change occurred in creativity, entrepreneurship, and the decline in innovation. But let me say that nevertheless, the technological environment, as in the internet case, tends to support and stimulate inclination to innovate. Institutions, I'm sure, play an important role. Corporatism and barriers to entry are certainly harmful, strongly harmful to dynamism. One could also, just quoted by Stefano Micossi, point out the negative effect on society where prevails a corporate model of endemic rent-seeking. Job satisfaction, good life, sharing knowledge and supporting condition for dynamism. But let me add some point more. Ned stated an important point, that is, the modern economy is primarily engaged in activity embodying past and new ideas. This is a strong point. It's an economy hiding dynamism, where the idea-driven activity might amount to a tenth of total man-hours work. This is what Ned wrote. But what lies behind the creation of new ideas? This is a question. Are they, the ideas, merely coming from the business sector or not? Governments are increasingly devoting strategic resources to develop a mission directed to change the technological and market landscape in the process. Let me make an example of the US government providing direct financing not only on basic research, but also applied research, like in the case of Apple. The idea is to provide funding for the most risk-uncertain investment. But what is the consequence of that? This means to have socialized the risk but privatized the rewards. And let me conclude with one more important point that I found in the book of Ned, also been repeating that the book is a mine of ideas and it's difficult to choose one of them. The short-termism is a point raised by Ned, saying that support of innovation requires to bend the inclination towards short-termism of managers in the financial sector. Not easy to be done, but indeed important. But short-termism is an approach widely influencing macro and micro economic policy. I share Ned's idea that the strength of an economy and its dynamism doesn't depend on the difference in the tax rate or on the strategy of the central banks. This is a point that's quite interesting, because in general, when we discuss about the crisis, everybody said, okay, but you have to make an intervention on tax rate on the central bank has to act for creating the condition for growth, not for dynamism, because the dynamism of an economy depends on much deeper issues like a cultural affinity for risk-taking, individual achievement. So experimenting and embarking in new projects. This is a very important point. And if you don't look at or don't adopt an economic policy aimed at dynamism, using a long-term policy view, investing on human capital, on inclusion and capability as precondition facing the productivity slowdown, there is no chance to be out of the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so far. Now I would like to ask the panel if there are any comments between you and any questions. So let's just listen. Yeah, Assar? Oh. Where are they gone?
Well, I agree with that. There are many more important things than tax rates, but I wouldn't say that tax rates are not important. When Sweden had the marginal tax rate of between 60 and 90% here for workers, that created very severe problems. It meant that dentists were drilling, working on the summer houses instead of fixing teeth, etc. So part of our reform was exactly to take down the marginal tax rate dramatically. Moreover, tax rates make a very strong distortions about the financing of investment and innovation, for instance, by having deductibility for interest rate but not for dividend payments, so that it's very expensive for firms to finance by equity capital. And that's important for small firms because they need equity capital, because that's often those who started don't have capital themselves. That's one point I would like to make. The other is that I am much more optimistic on technology than Bob Gordon, and there are two reasons for this. One is the spectacular breakthrough in many types of research in chemistry and physics in recent years. The nanotechnology, the DNA revolution, etc. It would be extremely surprising if these things did not generate new products that would violate all earlier experience of the importance of basic research. Moreover, earlier the basic research and innovations were mainly created by a small peninsula in the Asia-European continent called Western Europe, and in the US. Now we have Asia, China, India, and all these countries participate. We have to assume that there are some talented people around there too. So there's much larger pool of people who will make research and innovation in the future. Thank you.
So,
thank you. When we discuss in Brussels the relative performance of the European and the American economies in terms of innovation, we always find that we have in Europe as much basic research, more or less, as in the United States, concentrated in some countries, but basically we are not systematically lagging behind.
Well,
but
look at Nobel Prizes, they still go to the US.
Yes. Yes. One still wonders whether indicators of basic research still show that Europe is not faring that bad. Let's put it this way. Maybe not as well, but not that bad. The distance doesn't seem to be sufficient to justify the different rates of innovation and the dynamism of our societies. And so here I'm back to Gordon and Ned. In other words, the input of basic research, which is there, may not be sufficient to deliver the kind of growth and improvement in living standards that we would like to get.
Well, one of the points that seems to me important is to look at the change in the relative competitiveness of different countries between advanced and emerging countries. And the change is so important that created a new condition for being not only competitive, but creating an increase in productivity. The productivity comes obviously from a lot of factors, and I don't mention the list now. But if you look to the value-added activity of the different countries, you have a substantial change from the past to now, and let me say, the European countries mainly have to readjust their, combination of products and the value added produced by their activities for competing with different countries. So this explains one part, not all, of the slowdown of productivity. It seems to me important to mention it, just because it's true that productivity change and I'm talking about total factor productivity, obviously, is important and increasing depending on the capacity of making it entrepreneurship, innovation, but also looking at the relative position of the different countries. We have the way by which each country need time to readjust its competitive position. So, in some extent, the slowdown of productivity in European countries could be explained by this factor.
Any more comments within the panel? No? Then maybe we could let the audience come in with questions. You have been sitting here for a long time now without possibility to speak. Can you?
I made some comment. I wrote down some notes of things to say. Trouble is, I can't read my handwriting against this dark background very well. I think we've gone back too much today to growth, productivity growth, and there's not much willingness here to pick up what I thought was a very central theme of my book, that it's experience of work that counts. It's the process of exploring and experimenting and discovering and being challenged and problem solving, and that's what the good life is all about. It really doesn't matter much whether some scientific advance here or there raises productivity by 7% over the next decade. I mean, who cares, really? I don't get it. I think we should move on. Second point, not so much in this panel, but maybe in the afternoon in general, I thought we heard too much about, well, it's policies at the end of the day that are really the problem. And if we could get rid of some of the worst features of corporatism and maybe reintroduce some of the lovely features of corporatism, whatever those are, that would help a lot. But how can you do all those things as long as we have completely terrible attitudes about what the role of government is and even what the good life is? I mean, look, we're just in a hopeless, we're in a deep hole here. It's not hopeless, but we're in a very deep hole in which politicians deliberately confuse people about the sort of life that would satisfy them. I mean, for example, the politicians make people think that if they just owned a house, that's it. They'd be happy as clams. May not have jobs, may not get anywhere in their jobs. The jobs may be terrible. But if they own that house, that's the American dream, and that's great. A third point is that there's a tendency to think that, okay, traditional values are, a resurgence of traditional values might have a bad influence to some extent here and there, but it's corporatism is really the problem. But for me, corporatism grew out of traditional values. It's almost impossible to distinguish between corporatism, considered as a doctrine, and lots of traditional values like social protection, solidarity, moving in lockstep, et cetera, et cetera. And I keep hearing that science is going to save the whole thing, that we're going to get a bunch of scientific breakthroughs, and that's going to open the door to a raft of new commercial innovations which will enliven the workplace, bring about high prosperity and whatever and whatnot. But first of all, it seems to me like these scientific advances are mainly going to be good for elites, and they're not going to be so good for, not going to make much of a difference for ordinary people. And secondly, and I'm glad Joel Mokyr is here, I thought we learned from Joel and some other people that that fabulous period of the West between the 1820s or 30s or whatever up to 1940 was not, generally speaking, sparked by scientific advances. It was sparked by innovators, innovative entrepreneurs. And then the scientists scrambled to understand what on earth these clever entrepreneurs had done to make that thing work. We got to understand that. It was entrepreneurs and innovators behaving pragmatically on the way to discoveries of what works and what doesn't work. I'm sure there are gaps in my work, and I'm sure there are places where it may be exaggerated. But I still think that the things that my book regards as fallacious are fallacious.
Thank you. This is a really most exciting conference. I want to talk about silos. Every country represented here is a silo, and there's been very little attention to the interactions among countries. I want to thank Assar for talking about corporate taxes. I have a dog.
The microphone is gone.
The microphone.
The mic is gone, Bob. The microphone is gone.
Sure.
All right, let me start again. This is the most exciting conference. I want to talk about silos. Every country represented, discussed here is a silo, and there's been very little interaction other than a little chatter about globalization, about the impact of actions in one country on dynamism in another country. But let me start by talking about my dog. The dog there's a dog tax of $10 a year in Hanover, New Hampshire. My dog does not write a check. It's a very talented dog. I write a check, right? The corporate income tax is just a mirage. Corporations do not pay taxes. Corporations collect the funds to pay taxes either from their customers or from their suppliers. I hope you will all join me in an international union for the abolition of the corporate income tax of every country in the world. It makes politicians rich, and it, as Assar said, it distorts incentives. Now let's look at the United States. The United States now has a trade deficit of 3% of GDP. By definition, most of that trade deficit is in the tradable goods sector. So let's now assume that the tradable goods sector is 8% of US GDP. And let's assume that policies are adopted so that the US trade is balanced, which essentially means the WOGs in other countries will be prohibited from adopting their beggar thy neighbor policy, which enables them to underprice their currencies relative to ours. What will happen to the profit rate in US industry? What will the impact on the profit rate of US industry will be many times larger than nickel and diming the corporate income tax. And yet we ignore the interactions among these silos. If our trade were balanced, the output gap in the United States would disappear. The profit rate would soar. We would be at full employment. Let's stop thinking in terms of the silos and start thinking in terms of what are the implications of the underpricings of currencies or other distortions at national borders which interfere with incentives in the advanced countries. Thank you.
So I want to come back very briefly to the issue of whether science is coming to the rescue or not. And I think Assar sort of said it well. He says, it would be very surprising if all these scientific developments that we've had in the last 20 years would, in the end, not lead to something that would be pervasive through the economy. And I'm really taking issue with Ned's point that this, the science will really affect a few. That's not the historical record, Ned, and we should be really careful to follow the famous dictum of a great scientist, and everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler, right? And so the relationship between science, technology, and what you call mass flourishing, okay, innovation, is quite complex. It differs from sector to sector. It differs from industry to industry. It is never a one-way street, but I would say that if there are no scientific developments that are leading the way, eventually your mass flourishing are going to run into diminishing returns unless science comes around and opens new doors. And there have been certain scientific advances in the 20th century that have changed the world for tens of millions of producers. Let me give you one example which is celebrating its anniversary this year, and that's nitrogen fixing process, the Haber-Bosch process, which has been called by Václav Smil the great invention, capital G, capital I. Now, this was basically the finding of a handful of German chemists between 1912 and 1913, which essentially made it possible for this planet to maintain 7 billion people instead of 4 billion people, which was what the Malthusian prediction would have been. Now, this has affected every human being on the planet, Ned. And, you know, even more examples. I can put you back to 1928 to the lab of Alexander Fleming in Scotland. You know, we can go on like this. You never know which one is going to be the invention that opens many doors. Now, where you're absolutely right is if the institutions are wrong, if the culture is wrong, the door will be opened, but nobody will walk through it. But if the door is closed, no matter how many people are pushing, they're not going to get through. And so science and your mass flourishing aren't substitutes, they're complements. They're creating a great synergy, and it is that synergy which has created the modern age. Without your mass flourishing, without my scientists, okay, neither of them would have worked. That's, I think, the correct position to take. There are
There's all kinds of stuff. Looks to me to be remote from science that you could have important.
To be sure, but there are always, the nice thing about this, there are always surprises in this thing, Ned. So since the early days of history, okay, one of the things that has been limiting technology is the materials with which we work, right? So that's why we talk about things like the Bronze Age, right? Because that was the limiting material. Now, for most of the period of the Industrial Revolution, it was iron. Then Bob's second Industrial Revolution was steel. What we have done today, okay, is created a plethora of new materials where we can ourselves determine their physical characteristics. That is a general purpose technology if you've ever seen it. It's going to go into furniture manufacturing. It's going to go into artificial limb manufacturing. It's going to pervade everywhere. It's just that we don't know where it's going to go, but it will invade every design. Just as, say, the science of macromolecules has changed design because now we have plastics and synthetics to work with. Who knew when people developed organic chemistry in the 1840s? That's, I think, the way we're going. And you never know what a new invention or a new scientific breakthrough is going to lead to. There's a famous story about Michael Faraday, who developed the first generator. And so, just let me finish the sentence, and I'm done. And they asked him, "What good is your machine?" And Faraday answered, "What good is a newborn baby?"
I think the conference with the microphones illustrate the need for more technological development. That would simplify life for us here. I think we all are grateful to Ned for introducing what he called the good life. Because after all, the main task of economic system is not to produce impressive index of GDP development over time, but it's a good life issue. But I don't think there is necessarily any contradiction between a good life as you define it and a good life in the sense that for mass of people, good life requires jobs if they want to work, steady income, social insurance, or at least income insurance of some type, access to health care, old age care, education, etc. That is what most people think is good life for them. And then they want to have freedom of choice so that they can do what they like without destroying life for other people. So I think the issue is how to combine dynamism with a good life for the ordinary man who requires jobs, income, and security.
Okay, who is next? Up there. No.
Okay.
In the back. Yeah.
Thank you. I've read about half of Professor Phelps's book, and from what I understand, he's not trying to say that anything about make a judgment on science and technology at all. But instead, what he's trying to do is free up the economic models from having to depend totally on scientific and technological progress. Instead, this is a new view on what economic progress is. It's no longer tied to science and technological innovation on all that machinery. This is more a value-based effort and more about vitality. And so economics, you can measure economic progress using how science and technology are progressing. Or the other topic this afternoon was on political institutions, how strong they are in providing solutions to people's problems. And then I might comment here, there is already a lot of realization among economists that science and technology may not deliver. And so they already, a lot of economists have moved to like Keynesianism, using the government, using public institutions to provide solutions. And so I think the main point in what Professor Phelps is saying, in as much as the new thing that he's bringing in is that he's totally redefining economics, is no longer tied to all the mathematical models and then down to science and technology. He's freeing up. This is the thing. It's not, the future is not held ransom to any progress that only science and technology can develop. He can now tie up economic progress to other things that are happening in society. And so that is, I think, the main point. By emphasizing just values, it gives you this much freedom that some other development in society might now provide economic progress. And one other point I just wanted to make is the way in which Professor Phelps's approach is differing from Professor Amartya Sen. He, of course, Amartya Sen also always talks about human development in an index. And I think that is the respect in which Professor Phelps is relying more on actual data, productivity and all that he discusses so much in the book. So in these ways, he's not making a judgment on science and technology, but rather that freeing up the economic measuring machinery.
We would now prefer short comments because we have very little time. Sorry. Who is next?
Sorry, I will be short. I will give you two examples. South Korea. Today, this country is #1 in the world by number of patents per 1,000 people. Each patent in Korea required about 45 so-called rationalities. When you're going with science to particular job place, you need a lot of improvement. It's not scientific improvement. It's improvement around job place. Now I will give you one example. Historical already. Soviet Union. It was Cold War. Totally isolated country from other great technological achievements. But nonetheless, Russia created several Nobel laureates, grew up, and the most important, what is Professor Phelps speaking, homegrown innovations. Each new technology was required around 70 rationalizations. In Soviet Union was two different bureaus. One registered scientific patents, another registered rationalization of simple employees on every single work. What did not have Soviet Union? Economic freedom. This is why it's worked to create kind of competitive technologies, especially weapons technology, which still Russia is using, and did not increase standard of living. When we combine freedom of choice with high technology and motivation of simple employees on every single place, this is creation of homegrown innovations which not limited to technology. Thank you.
Thank you. before we close, we have to close pretty soon the session, and as an outsider, I would like to say that I would have liked to hear more about modern values and the drivers of modern values for creating a flourishing, I wouldn't not say economy, but a flourishing good life for people. There was much in Ned's book about that, but we haven't used that theme enough according to my values. The young generations have these modern values, and in other sciences we talk about postmodern or values, and they are very strong drivers, and I am sure they will affect the work life considerably in the future. And we are now in a period of transition between modern and late modern values, and that causes much of the problems. But let's see what is coming out. And now I say thank you to the panel, and thank you for the questions being asked.